When I first noticed it, I didn't want to believe it. I sat there in my small, sunlit kitchen, the scent of burnt toast clinging faintly to the air, and stared at my laptop screen like it was some cruel joke. The numbers didn't lie, and yet I kept telling myself they must be wrong. My daughter, my sweet, giggling 16-year-old, had been quietly taking money from me, my savings, my hard-earned nest egg, over the years, hiding it in a secret account I had never even heard of. I remember the exact moment the panic hit me. I had logged into my online banking to check a recent transaction, nothing unusual, just routine. And that's when I saw it. A series of transfers I didn't recognize. At first I thought it was a mistake, a glitch. Maybe a fraud alert, I reasoned. But then I traced it. Each transfer led to an account registered under her name. My heart stopped. I could hear the quiet hum of the refrigerator behind me, the ticking of the clock on the wall. But in that silence, all I could feel was my pulse in my ears. My daughter, the one I had tucked into bed only yesterday, the one who smiled at me across the breakfast table and whispered, "I love you, Mom," had been stealing from me. For a while, I just sat there, frozen, staring at her name on the screen. I thought about all the times I had given her money for school trips, for little extras she had needed for friends, for clothes, for books, for snacks she always said were for school lunches. Each memory twisted itself in my mind, and I realized the truth had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. She had been methodical, clever, and quiet. I remember my fingers trembling as I closed the laptop. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, the sunlight too bright, too exposing. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake her until she told me why. But more than anything, I wanted to understand. How had my own daughter, the child I raised with so much care, come to see me as a bank rather than a mother? It wasn't just about the money. That much was clear. Money could be replaced. But trust? That was something else entirely. And that, I realized with a sudden, icy certainty, was what had been stolen from me as well. The day had started normally enough. She had breakfast in her usual distracted way, toast with a smear of peanut butter, cereal spilling over the edges of her bowl. Her hair was messy, her socks mismatched, and she had muttered a quick, "Bye, Mom," before rushing out to catch the bus. I had kissed her forehead without thinking, smiled at her messy hair, and then watched her disappear down the street. I had no idea I was watching the last few moments of that innocent facade. Later that morning, I tried to go about my work. I brewed a second cup of coffee, the rich smell warming the room, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I scrolled through emails, bills, and statements, pretending I wasn't obsessing over the first discovery. But my mind kept drifting back to her name on that bank account. I wondered when it had started, how long it had been going on, what she had used the money for. Was it shopping? Friends, trips? Or something darker, something I hadn't anticipated at all? The thought of confronting her, of asking her directly, made my stomach churn. I loved my daughter fiercely. I always had. She had been my little shadow, following me around the house, tugging on my sleeve, whispering secrets in the middle of the night. And now the idea that she had been lying, hiding, betraying me, it made my heart ache in a way I had never known. I decided to wait. I told myself I needed more evidence, needed to be sure before I said anything. I started quietly looking through receipts, bank statements, and transaction histories, tracing patterns, dates, and amounts. And as I did, the pattern became impossible to ignore. It wasn't random. It wasn't a one-time thing. It had been happening for years, almost small enough at first to be considered pocket money, but over time it had grown into a staggering total that made me feel dizzy when I added it up. And then a memory hit me. A small one, almost laughable at the time, but now, not so much. She had asked me for money for a school fundraiser once, and I remembered handing her $20 thinking nothing of it. Later, I had found a receipt from a boutique downtown, a receipt for a bag that cost far more than $20. At the time, I had shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was a gift from a friend. But now everything lined up. Every little inconsistency, Every time I had wondered why cash went missing from my purse, why my bank statement didn't quite match what I thought, it all clicked into place. I felt tears prick at my eyes, not just for the betrayal, but for the loss of innocence, for the sudden, sharp realization that I hadn't really known my daughter at all. The person who had shared secrets with me at bedtime, who had giggled at my silly jokes, who had cried when she fell at the park, was not exactly the person I thought she was. She was more cunning, more complicated, more human. When she returned home that evening, I noticed nothing outwardly different in her demeanor. She laughed with her friends on the phone, dropped her backpack on the floor, kicked off her shoes, and slumped onto the couch. She was 15 minutes late for dinner, and I didn't scold her. I watched her, studying the movements of her hands as she twirled a strand of hair, the way her eyes darted to her phone whenever I glanced her way. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible tension in the air, but I could feel it. And for the first time I wondered, had she always been like this? Had there been warning signs I missed while I was busy being a mother, being a provider, being trusting? I took a deep breath. I needed to plan, not just confront. I had to approach this carefully, not with anger, not with shame, but with the truth. I wanted her to understand the weight of her actions, without destroying the bond that still somehow remained between us. And in that moment, I realized that what lay ahead would test everything: my patience, my judgment, and the very fabric of our relationship. The first night, I barely slept. I lay awake listening to the faint creaks of the house settling, the distant sound of her breathing in the next room, and my mind raced. How could I tell her? What would I say? Would she cry or deflect or deny? And underneath it all, a quieter, deeper fear whispered, what if she didn't feel guilty at all? What if she thought she was justified? I knew then that the next day would be the beginning of a reckoning that would test not only my love for her but the limits of my forgiveness. And as the house settled into the night, I closed my eyes, the taste of coffee lingering on my tongue, and prepared myself for what I hoped would be an honest, painful, and ultimately healing confrontation. The next morning, I made breakfast almost mechanically, the smell of sizzling bacon and brewing coffee doing little to soothe the knot in my stomach. My daughter wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, hair still messy from sleep, and muttered a sleepy, "Morning, Mom," as if nothing had changed. I watched her, studying her face, the familiar softness around her cheeks, the small freckles on her nose that I had loved since she was a child. I wanted so badly to believe that the girl I saw was still the same one I had raised, but the bank account on my screen, the evidence of betrayal, was a reminder that trust could be fragile, even between mother and daughter. I set her plate down and forced myself to smile. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, pouring her a glass of orange juice. I tried to keep my tone casual, conversational, almost as if nothing was wrong. But inside, my mind was racing. I had spent the entire night going over the numbers again, planning how I would approach her without pushing her into anger or denial. As we ate, I paid close attention to her movements. She picked at her toast, scrolling through her phone with quick, impatient swipes. When she looked up, her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I thought I caught a flicker of guilt, but it was gone almost instantly. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or something real. After breakfast, she grabbed her backpack and prepared to leave for school. I decided that I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to plant the first seed of confrontation, not in anger, but in subtle questioning. "By the way," I said casually as she stood in the doorway, "have you been saving money recently? Maybe from allowances, gifts, that sort of thing?" She blinked, a little surprised, but quickly smiled. "Yeah, a little. Why?" "Just curious," I said, keeping my voice light. I studied her reaction, the way her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her backpack. There was something in her pause that didn't sit right with me. I nodded, dismissing it outwardly, but inwardly, I felt a sharp pang. Once she left, I returned to my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I pulled up her secret account again. The numbers stared back at me, each transaction a silent accusation. Clothes, gadgets, a few meals at restaurants, and even a weekend trip she had supposedly done with friends. My chest tightened. I had worked hard to provide for her, to give her opportunities, and yet she had found ways to take more than what I had intended. I called my friend, Marie, while pacing the living room. Marie had been a mother for longer than I had, and her advice had always been grounded and wise. "I don't know what to do, Marie," I said, voice tight. "I feel betrayed. And I feel like maybe I failed as a mother." Marie's voice was calm on the other end. "You didn't fail. Kids make mistakes, even big ones. But you need to handle this carefully. Don't accuse. Ask questions. Let her tell you her side. You want honesty, not fear." I nodded to myself, taking in her words. Fear wasn't going to get me anywhere. I needed clarity. I needed honesty. Later that afternoon, I decided to confront her while she was doing homework at the dining table. The smell of markers and paper filled the air, a reminder of the innocence of her age. I sat across from her, hands folded on the table, and tried to keep my voice steady. "Sweetheart," I began softly. "I came across something today. Something I wasn't expecting. I saw a bank account, one that has your name on it." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. I continued. "There are transactions from my savings. Money that I didn't know you had access to. Can you tell me about that?" She swallowed hard, the pencil in her hand tapping nervously against her notebook. "Mom, I can explain," she said, her voice trembling. I nodded, encouraging her gently. "I'm listening. I want to understand, not yell or punish. I just need honesty." Her hands were shaking now. She closed her notebook, folded it neatly, and looked at me with eyes that were suddenly very serious for someone so young. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. I don't know. I always felt left out, I guess. When you were busy with work or with chores or just life, I wanted some independence. I thought if I saved money secretly, it would be mine. Something I could control. The room was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. I could hear her small, uneven breaths. My heart ached, not just because of the theft, but because of the loneliness she had clearly felt. I reached out and touched her hand. "I didn't know you felt that way," I said softly. "I thought I was giving you what you needed. I didn't realize you felt disconnected." She looked down at our hands, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing. "I didn't want to make you angry," she admitted. "I didn't think you'd understand. I thought, maybe if I just did it quietly it wouldn't matter. It was a lot to take in." The anger I had felt started to mingle with sorrow and a deep, aching love. She was my child. She was flawed but human, and she had acted out of a complicated mix of fear, longing, and a desire for control over her own life. "I need you to understand something," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "Taking money without asking? That breaks trust. And trust is harder to rebuild than money. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Mom," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I got carried away." We sat together in silence for a few moments, letting the words settle. I could see her guilt, but also a budding sense of accountability. This was the first step. She had told the truth. She had admitted her mistake. And while the road ahead would not be easy, it was a start. I realized then that this story wasn't just about stolen money. It was about communication, understanding, and learning to navigate the messy, complicated emotions that came with growing up. And while my trust had been shaken, I also felt a renewed determination to help her learn from this, rather than punish her in a way that could close her off entirely. I knew that the days ahead would involve careful planning, talks about consequences, restitution, and rebuilding trust. But at that moment, sitting across from her, watching her small shoulders relax slightly, I felt the first flicker of hope that we could mend what had been broken. And so, the slow journey of understanding, accountability, and emotional reckoning began. I had confronted the betrayal, and she had met it with honesty. Now, it was time to navigate what came next. How to repair not just the money that was lost, but the bond that had been shaken to its core. The next few days were quiet, almost deceptively so. My daughter went about her routine as usual, but there was a subtle shift in her energy. She seemed smaller somehow, shoulders slightly hunched, careful not to meet my eyes for too long, yet still lingering near me in ways that suggested a mix of guilt and longing for connection. I noticed it in the way she fidgeted with her hair at the dinner table, in the nervous tap of her foot while doing homework, and even in the way she avoided the living room couch where we had always sat together. I, too, felt different. The shock and anger I had felt initially had been replaced by a heavier, quieter tension. Every time I opened the fridge, I reminded myself that the food inside was mine, and that some of it had been paid for with money she had quietly taken. Every time I reached for my wallet, I thought of the sums that had disappeared over the years. And yet, through it all, there was a gnawing question I couldn't shake. How do you punish someone you love without breaking them? I decided I needed a plan. Not a vengeful one, not even a punitive one, but a structured approach to help her understand the gravity of her actions and make amends. I started by listing everything that had been taken, carefully tracing transactions, creating a spreadsheet. I left it open on my laptop, visible, but didn't say anything about it yet. Later that evening, I called her into my room. "Sit with me for a minute," I said gently, patting the bed beside me. She hesitated, then sat, hands folded neatly on her lap, eyes downcast. "I want to talk about restitution," I began. She looked up at me, blinking rapidly. "Restitution?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "The money you took, it's not just numbers on a screen. It represents trust. It represents me. And it has to be returned. You need to understand what it means to make things right." Her lips trembled as she nodded. I'll do whatever it takes," she said quietly. I outlined my expectations carefully. She would repay the money she had taken, not all at once, but through small contributions from allowances, babysitting her younger cousins, and other chores around the house. It wasn't about punishment. It was about understanding the value of honesty, accountability, and the weight of her actions. She agreed, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I never wanted to hurt you, Mom," she said again. I felt so invisible sometimes. I didn't know how else to be seen." I pulled her into a hug, holding her tight, and I felt her shudder with emotion. "You are seen," I whispered. "You've always been seen, but taking money wasn't the way to show it. I want you to learn from this, not just for me, but for yourself." The next few weeks were an adjustment for both of us. She worked diligently to repay the money, keeping meticulous notes and receipts. I, in turn, made sure to acknowledge her efforts, offering encouragement when she seemed discouraged. We had long talks about honesty, integrity, and the consequences of our choices, not just in financial matters, but in life as a whole. 1. Afternoon, I caught her sitting at the kitchen table, tears in her eyes as she balanced her first repayment against the total debt. I sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing really well," I said softly. "I'm proud of you, not just for returning the money, but for taking responsibility." She looked up, eyes glistening. I don't want you to ever hate me, Mom. I know I messed up." I shook my head gently. "I could never hate you. You made a mistake, yes, but mistakes don't define us. How we handle them does." That evening, I found myself reflecting on the situation in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about money or theft. It was about communication, trust, and the unspoken emotions that had been building between us for years. I realized that she had been crying out for attention, for acknowledgement, in the only way she knew how. And while her method was misguided, the underlying truth was that she needed to be heard, to be seen, and to feel like her feelings mattered. One night, I overheard her on a phone call with a friend. Her voice was quieter than usual, almost hesitant. She said, "I'm trying to make it right. I don't want to lose her trust." Listening from the hallway, I felt a swell of emotion that I couldn't quite name. Relief, pride, sorrow, and hope all mixed together. Still, there were moments when the weight of betrayal hung heavy between us. One afternoon, I found her staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. I knocked gently on the door. "Can I come in?" I asked. She nodded, and I entered. I stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, as she whispered, "I can't believe I did this. I feel so wrong." I knelt beside her, looking into her eyes. "You did something wrong, yes, but you're facing it, you're learning, and that makes you stronger, not weaker." She leaned into me, and for a moment, we sat in silence. The faint smell of shampoo and soap surrounding us, a simple comfort in the midst of emotional upheaval. Over time, the tension in the house began to ease. There were still difficult conversations, moments of frustration, and occasional tears, but also laughter, quiet gestures of affection, and an emerging sense of teamwork. She started opening up more about her feelings, about the pressure she had felt, the envy of her friends, the confusion of being a teenager in a world that demanded independence while still expecting obedience. And I started listening more closely, asking questions, validating emotions, rather than jumping straight to judgment. Through all of this, I realized that the true theft hadn't just been of money. It had been of honesty, of open communication. And rebuilding that trust required patience, empathy, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths without letting anger dictate our actions. I began to notice small changes in her behavior, moments where she would pause before taking something that didn't belong to her, moments where she would ask permission rather than assume, and even small acts of thoughtfulness. A note left on my pillow, a cup of tea made just the way I liked it. Each gesture was a small victory, a tangible sign that the lessons were taking root. And yet, there was still the lingering question in my mind. Could trust ever be fully restored? Could the damage, though slowly being repaired, ever truly disappear? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew that this journey, however painful, was shaping both of us in ways that mattered. It wasn't long before the consequences of her actions extended beyond the walls of our home. One evening, I received a call from the bank. A quiet, formal voice on the other end explaining that some irregular activity had been flagged on the account. They needed confirmation that everything was legitimate. My stomach dropped, but I realized this might be an opportunity, not to shame her, but to show her the real-world repercussions of dishonesty. I sat down with her at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, and I explained the situation. "You see, this isn't just about money between us anymore," I said gently. "This is public. Others are involved. We need to take responsibility fully." Her eyes widened. "Mom, what does that mean?" "It means you'll need to explain and possibly correct the mistakes with the bank. It means facing authority, facing rules that exist for everyone. It's a lesson. Hard. Yes, but necessary." She nodded slowly, swallowing hard, the weight of accountability settling over her like a heavy blanket. I watched her fidget, the pencil in her hand tapping against her notebook, and I realized that these were exactly the lessons she needed. Not lectures from me, not punishments behind closed doors, but a first-hand understanding of how actions have consequences in the real world. Over the next few days, we worked together to reconcile her secret account with the bank. She called them herself, explained the situation with a shaking voice, and agreed to return the funds. I stayed nearby, offering gentle guidance when she stumbled over her words, but mostly letting her navigate the uncomfortable process alone. It was hard for both of us. She cried openly one night after speaking to the bank representative, the tears flowing freely as she admitted to her mistakes. I held her close, feeling both pride and sorrow. Pride that she was finally facing reality, sorrow for the innocence lost and the trust that had been broken. At school, the fallout was quieter, but still significant. She had to explain to friends why she no longer had certain things she had previously purchased, why allowances were now accounted for and earned differently. Some friends were understanding, others judgmental, and I could see the embarrassment and shame in her eyes. I never interfered. I wanted her to learn the hard lessons of honesty and accountability. One afternoon, as we walked home together, she broke the silence. "Mom, I think I understand now. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about trust. And I broke that." I smiled, a small, warm smile, and squeezed her hand. "Exactly. Money can be replaced, but trust, that's fragile. And rebuilding it takes time and effort. But I know you can do it." We started creating small routines to repair our relationship. Weekly check-ins, shared chores, and honest conversations about her feelings became our new normal. I noticed subtle shifts. She would come to me with questions before making purchases. She would ask for guidance when faced with a tough decision. And she began opening up about school, friendships, and worries that had previously been bottled inside. At the same time, I had my own reflections. I realized that while I had been providing materially, I hadn't always been emotionally available. My work, my chores, and my focus on household management had sometimes left her feeling unseen, unheard. I began to make small changes. More shared meals, quieter moments together, walks after dinner where we would talk about nothing and everything, and a conscious effort to ask how she felt rather than assuming she was fine. One evening, as we were organizing her room together, I found a small notebook she had hidden under her bed. Curiosity got the better of me, and I flipped through it gently. It was filled with notes, lists of desires, frustrations, and confessions, some petty, some deeply honest. She had written about feeling invisible, about the pressure to fit in, and about the small rebellions she had taken to assert her independence. I closed the notebook and set it aside without a word. I didn't need to confront her about it. The mere existence of those pages was a revelation. She had been struggling silently, trying to find her voice in ways that had gone unseen. And while I could not condone the method she had chosen, stealing from me, the honesty of her emotions was something I needed to acknowledge silently. Over time, her repayment plan continued. Small amounts returned through diligent effort. I watched her grow more confident, more self-aware. There were still moments of tension, arguments over chores, disagreements about allowances, small lapses in judgment, but the foundation of honesty was being rebuilt. I began to notice other changes too. Her demeanor at school improved, her relationships with friends grew healthier, and even our family dinners became warmer, more connected. The quiet tension that had lingered in the house after the discovery began to fade, replaced by cautious optimism and shared responsibility. One evening, after she had finished her chores, we sat together on the couch, the faint smell of baking cookies still in the air from the afternoon. She leaned against me and whispered, "Mom, thank you for giving me a chance to make it right." I held her close, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and lingering sadness. "You're welcome, sweetheart. Making mistakes doesn't define you. How you handle them does." The moral was clear, both for her and for me. Trust, once broken, could be rebuilt through honesty, effort, and empathy. The journey was ongoing, but the first steps had been taken. The weeks that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Every interaction, every word seemed to carry more weight than before. I could see it in her eyes, how much she wanted to regain my trust, how scared she was of slipping back into the mistakes of the past. And I, in turn, found myself being more deliberate with my words, more patient with her struggles, more aware of the subtle ways my own behavior affected her. One morning, I noticed her standing by the window, sunlight streaming over her face, staring quietly at the street below. She had a notebook in hand, scribbling something furiously. I approached her slowly, careful not to startle her. "What are you writing?" I asked softly. She turned, a sheepish smile on her face. "Just my thoughts. Things I don't always say out loud. I thought maybe if I wrote them, I could understand myself better. I nodded, sitting beside her on the floor. That's a good idea. Writing helps us see our own feelings clearly. And sharing them, well, it helps others understand us too. She looked down at her notebook and hesitated, then handed it to me. You don't have to read it if you don't want to, she said. I accepted it gently, flipping through the pages. There were confessions of regret, notes of apology, and reflections on her actions. She had written about feeling guilty for taking the money, about fearing that she had permanently damaged our relationship, and about the shame she felt facing her friends and peers. But mixed in with the guilt were moments of insight, self-awareness, and determination to do better. I handed the notebook back to her. Thank you for sharing this with me. It means a lot, and I can see how hard you're working to make things right. That's what matters most, she smiled. A small, tentative smile, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimpse of the girl I had known before the betrayal. The girl who laughed easily, who was curious about the world, who had a spark in her eyes that could light up a room. That evening, we sat down to dinner as a family. My daughter had prepared a small speech. She stood at the table, holding a piece of paper in her hands, and looked at each of us carefully. I want to say something, she began, voice wavering slightly. I know I've made a lot of mistakes. I've broken trust, I've hurt Mom, and I've disappointed all of you.
I'm truly sorry.
I'm working to make things right, and I hope someday I can earn back your full trust. I've learned that honesty is everything, and that hiding things only makes the pain worse. I want to be better. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. She had not only admitted her wrongdoing, but also articulated the lessons she had learned. She had taken responsibility in a way that was mature beyond her years. I reached out and held her hand. Thank you for saying that, I said softly. I see the effort you're making, and I'm proud of you. It won't be perfect overnight, but the fact that you're committed to change makes all the difference. The rest of the meal was quieter than usual, but there was a calmness in the air, a sense of healing beginning to take root. Small gestures of kindness followed. She helped with dishes without being asked, checked in with me about her schoolwork, and even left little notes of encouragement on my desk. Each act was a reminder that change was possible, that relationships could be mended, and that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt with intention and care. One weekend, I suggested that we create a small family project together, something that would symbolize rebuilding and collaboration. She eagerly agreed, and we decided to organize the garage, a space that had become cluttered and chaotic over the years. As we sorted through boxes, laughing at forgotten items and memories, I realized that these simple shared tasks were just as important as the more serious conversations. They were moments of connection, moments where we could work side by side, rebuilding both our physical space and our emotional bonds. During a break, she turned to me, wiping sweat from her forehead. Mom, thank you for not giving up on me, she said quietly. I felt my throat tighten. I could never give up on you, I replied. You're my daughter. We'll make mistakes, yes, but we learn from them and we grow together. That's what family is. Her eyes glistened and I saw a mix of relief, gratitude, and a newfound sense of responsibility. She had faced the consequences of her actions, admitted her mistakes, and now was actively choosing to be a better person. As the day drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the journey so far. The betrayal had been painful, the hurt deep, but it had also been a catalyst for growth, for both of us. I had learned to listen more, to communicate more openly, and to recognize the subtle signs of emotional struggle in my child. She had learned the value of honesty, the weight of consequences, and the importance of accountability. There were still challenges ahead, no doubt. Trust could be fragile, and the memories of the betrayal would linger. But the foundation had been laid, a foundation built on honesty, reflection, and the willingness to confront difficult truths. That night, as I tucked her into bed, I noticed the faint scent of lavender from her pillow, a small detail that reminded me of the girl she had been and the young woman she was becoming. I held her hand gently. I love you, I whispered. I love you too. Mom, she replied, her voice soft, sincere, and full of a promise that she meant to keep. And in that quiet, tender moment, I felt a sense of hope. The road to full reconciliation would be long, and the memories of betrayal would not disappear overnight. But there was something more important than money or mistakes. It was the bond we shared, the willingness to face truth, and the courage to rebuild trust together. The next morning, I woke to the smell of pancakes drifting from the kitchen. My daughter had taken it upon herself to make breakfast, a small yet meaningful gesture of reconciliation. I found her at the stove, flipping the pancakes with careful attention, the sunlight catching her hair in a way that made her look almost serene. Good morning, I said softly, stepping into the kitchen. Morning. Mom, she replied a little nervously, as if she were testing the waters of our renewed trust. I watched her work, the way she measured ingredients carefully, the little hum she made under her breath. It struck me that these small acts, simple gestures of care and effort, were slowly restoring the emotional bridge between us. It wasn't about grand apologies or dramatic confessions anymore. It was about consistency, accountability, and the subtle ways she was proving her sincerity. As we sat down to eat, I made a mental note of how much things had shifted. The tension that had dominated our home for weeks had eased, replaced by tentative warmth and cautious optimism. She asked me about my day, genuinely interested, and I responded with the same openness. There was no awkwardness, no false smiles, just a quiet, genuine attempt at rebuilding our relationship. Later that day, I suggested we go through the house together, tackling tasks we had previously neglected. It was a symbolic act, but it also served as a practical way to instill responsibility and collaboration. We started with her room, sorting clothes and organizing her belongings. She found old receipts and little trinkets, and we laughed over forgotten memories. It was almost therapeutic. Through cleaning and organizing, we were untangling the emotional knots left behind by her secret bank account. During a break, she sat down beside me, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Mom, I've been thinking, she said slowly, about why I did what I did. It wasn't just about the money. I just wanted control over something in my life. I felt like I had no say sometimes, and taking the money was wrong, but it gave me a false sense of independence. I nodded, listening carefully. Her words revealed a level of introspection that made my chest tighten. I understand, I said gently. You wanted to feel seen, heard, and independent. But there are healthier ways to gain control, ways that don't break trust or hurt the people who love you. And now that you understand that, you can start making better choices. She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and shame in her expression. I want to do better, Mom. I really do. I reached out and squeezed her hand. I know you do, and I'll help you every step of the way. Mistakes happen, but what matters is what we learn from them. That evening, we faced another challenge. The school counselor had called, wanting to discuss some unusual behavior patterns she had noticed in my daughter over the past months. Withdrawn moments, occasional avoidance of social interactions, and signs of stress. While I had been aware of some of this, the counselor's observations added another layer to my understanding. Sitting together in the counselor's office, I listened as my daughter spoke openly, sharing her feelings about pressure, expectations, and the sense of invisibility that had led to her actions. It was a painful session, filled with tears and honest reflection, but it was also illuminating. I realized that the theft wasn't just a moral lapse, it was a symptom of deeper emotional needs that had gone unmet. After the session, we walked home in silence. The air was crisp, the faint scent of autumn leaves in the breeze, and the quiet gave space for reflection. You did really well today, I said softly. Breaking the silence, she looked at me, eyes glistening. I hope I'm finally starting to understand how to be honest and how to face consequences. You are, I reassured her, and this is just the beginning. Facing consequences doesn't end with a session or repayment plan. It's a lifelong practice of integrity, accountability, and self-awareness. Over the next few days, I noticed more subtle changes. She began initiating conversations about her feelings and worries rather than bottling them up. She sought guidance before making decisions, showing a newfound maturity in managing her independence. Even our casual interactions, once tense and cautious, began to feel lighter and more genuine. One afternoon, I caught her sitting on her bed, writing in her notebook. I didn't interrupt, but I watched as she paused, thoughtfully rereading what she had written. Her pen moved deliberately, leaving clear, reflective notes about her actions, regrets, and plans to continue improving. It was a private ritual, a way to process emotions, and I realized it was helping her develop both self-discipline and emotional intelligence. Later that evening, as I tucked her into bed, she looked at me with something I hadn't seen in weeks, calm confidence mingled with humility. "Mom, I want you to know I don't ever want to hide anything from you again," she whispered. I held her hand, feeling a rush of relief and love, and I promised to listen, really listen whenever you do. That's the foundation of trust, and we're rebuilding it together. As I left her room, I paused in the doorway, looking back at her peacefully sleeping. I realized that while the road to full reconciliation would be long and filled with challenges, the first critical steps had been taken. There was a fragile but growing sense of harmony in our home, a sense that even serious mistakes could be repaired through honesty, effort, and understanding. That night, I reflected on the journey so far. The betrayal had been devastating, shaking the foundation of our relationship. But it had also created an opportunity to understand each other more deeply, to learn about emotional needs that had gone unnoticed, and to build a stronger, more resilient bond. I recognized that love wasn't just about forgiving mistakes. It was about guiding, nurturing, and walking together through difficult lessons. As I drifted to sleep, I felt a quiet hope settle over me. There would be more conversations, more challenges, and more moments that tested our trust. But for the first time in a long while, I believed we could navigate them together, hand in hand, heart to heart. The following week brought new challenges, though not the kind I had anticipated. It wasn't about money or rules this time. It was about rebuilding her reputation among friends and relatives who had quietly caught wind of her secret account. I noticed her hesitating before inviting friends over or deflecting questions about purchases she no longer had the money for. The whispers and glances weren't cruel, but they carried a weight that only a teenager could feel acutely. One afternoon, she sat down next to me at the kitchen table, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. "Mom, I think some of my friends are judging me. I don't know how to explain without sounding stupid or guilty." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You don't need to justify your feelings to anyone but yourself. But honesty goes a long way. If you feel ready, you can explain what happened and what you're doing to make it right. People respect accountability, even if the mistake itself was serious." She nodded slowly, eyes downcast. "Okay, I think I can try. But what if they laugh at me?" "They might," I admitted. "Or they might be supportive. But either way, you'll be doing the right thing. And that's what matters. Being honest builds integrity. You can't control how everyone reacts, but you can control your actions." She took a deep breath, then smiled faintly. "I'll try, Mom. I'll try." Later that evening, I watched as she drafted a small note to her closest friends. She admitted her mistake, explained what she was doing to make amends, and expressed a desire to rebuild trust. I could see the care she took with every word, the careful phrasing, the acknowledgement of consequences, the humility in her tone. It was a small but powerful step toward reclaiming not just their trust, but her own sense of self-worth. The next day, one of her friends came over. I stayed out of earshot, listening quietly as she read the note aloud. There was hesitation at first, a pause filled with awkward silence, but then her friend nodded slowly, a small smile breaking across her face. "Thanks for being honest. That takes courage." When she came back to me later, her face was flushed with relief. "Mom, it wasn't as bad as I thought." She actually understood. And she said she'll help me make it right if I need anything. I hugged her tightly, feeling a wave of pride and relief. The external consequences of her actions were beginning to ease, and she was learning a critical lesson about accountability, courage, and the importance of honesty in all relationships, not just with family. That evening, I suggested we start a new tradition, weekly mother-daughter talks. Just 30 minutes, uninterrupted, to discuss feelings, events, and struggles. She agreed, though shyly at first, and I felt a sense of anticipation. These talks would be more than conversation. They would be a space for emotional connection, guidance, and rebuilding trust in a structured way. The first session was awkward. She fidgeted in her chair, her hands clasped tightly together. I started gently, asking about her day, her schoolwork, and her friends. Slowly, she began to open up, telling me about pressures she hadn't mentioned before, about moments when she had felt overlooked or invisible, and about small temptations that had led her down the wrong path. I listened without judgment, asking questions to clarify her feelings, validating her emotions while gently reinforcing lessons about honesty and responsibility. By the end of the session, there were smiles, shared laughter, and even a few lighthearted teasing moments. I realized how much we had missed these conversations before, lost in the busyness of life and the weight of unspoken expectations. The next few days brought small victories. She approached me before making purchases, double-checking if it was okay to use her allowance or if she needed to save for something more important. She took initiative in household tasks, helping with laundry, dishes, and even planning small meals. Her effort was consistent, deliberate, and visible, proof that change was possible when combined with guidance. Patience and empathy. One afternoon, as I was organizing the kitchen drawers, she joined me, quietly humming. Without prompting, she reached for the old savings jar we had kept on the top shelf and placed a small amount inside, her first voluntary contribution to repairing the trust between us. I glanced at her, startled by the gesture, and she smiled shyly. "I want to do this, Mom," she said softly. "Not because you told me, but because I need to." I felt a lump in my throat. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered. "This means more than words can express. It shows responsibility and understanding, and that's exactly what I've been hoping to see." That night, as I tucked her into bed, she reached for my hand and held it tightly. "Mom, I feel like I'm finally understanding myself better, and I want to keep getting better. For you, for me, and for everyone I care about." I stroked her hair gently, feeling a sense of relief that I hadn't felt in weeks. "You're doing wonderfully," I said softly. "This journey isn't easy, but it's worth every step. And I'll be here, every step of the way." As I left her room, I realized that the betrayal, while painful, had sparked a series of transformations. She was learning accountability, honesty, and the importance of making amends. I was learning patience, empathy, and how to nurture her growth without overstepping or controlling. And together, we were slowly rebuilding the trust that had been broken, one deliberate action at a time. For the first time in weeks, the house felt lighter. Laughter returned to the evenings, small gestures of care became routine, and the quiet anxiety that had hung over us began to dissipate. Yet I knew this was only the beginning. Trust was fragile, and the temptation to fall back into old patterns would likely remain. But for now, we were moving forward, cautiously, deliberately, and with hearts open to healing. The days that followed brought a new rhythm to our home. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but there was a sense of steady progress, an undercurrent of healing that had been absent for months. I watched her grow more confident in her decisions, more thoughtful about her actions, and more open in expressing her feelings. Even small things, asking before using money, volunteering to help with chores, checking in on my day, became evidence of her gradual transformation. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old family photos, she sat beside me quietly. "Mom, can we talk about something?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Of course," I said, turning to her. She fiddled with a corner of the photo album. "I've been thinking about everything I did. about taking your money, about hiding it, about lying. And I realized I don't just want to fix what I broke with money. I want to be better in every way. I want to be someone you can fully trust. I felt a lump in my throat. Her words were honest, reflective, and self-aware. It was one thing to make restitution financially. It was another entirely to strive for personal growth and emotional integrity. That's a very brave thing to say, I replied gently. And I can see that you're serious about it. That's the kind of change that lasts. She looked down, then met my gaze. I want to earn back not just your trust, but everyone's. I want my friends to see me as someone honest, responsible, and capable. And I want to believe that about myself, too. I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. You're on the right path, and I'll help you however I can. But remember, change isn't instant. It's a series of choices, every day, that build into the person you want to become. Over the next few days, I noticed her taking deliberate steps toward that growth. She apologized to a neighbor whose small gift she had taken without asking, explained the situation honestly, and even offered to make amends. She approached school projects with newfound diligence, asking for guidance when needed and ensuring she followed through with accountability. Each act reinforced the lessons she had learned and showed me that her desire to change was genuine. One evening, I came home from work to find her sitting at the kitchen table, carefully writing thank you notes to people who had supported her during this difficult time. Friends who had offered encouragement, teachers who had shown patience, and even me, for guiding her through the storm. The sight struck me deeply. She had moved from a place of secrecy and shame to one of reflection and gratitude. I thought it was important, she said when I approached. These people were kind when I messed up, and I want them to know I appreciate it. I don't want to take anything for granted anymore. I knelt beside her, feeling a surge of pride. That's a beautiful thing you're doing. Gratitude is the kind of habit that shapes character. It's a sign of true growth. Her efforts extended into her daily interactions at home. She began looking out for her younger sibling, helping with homework, listening attentively, and showing empathy in ways she hadn't before. It was as if the act of facing her mistakes and working to make amends had unlocked a deeper understanding of responsibility, not just to herself, but to everyone around her. Then came a moment that truly tested her progress. One afternoon, she discovered a small sum of money missing from her savings jar, a sum she had earned from chores and allowances. Panic flashed across her face. "Mom, I think it's gone. I don't understand. I put it here yesterday." I stayed calm, kneeling beside her. "Let's figure this out together. Did you check everywhere it could be?" She nodded, visibly shaking. "Yes, I counted twice." We spent the next hour retracing her steps, checking pockets, drawers, and even the living room couch cushions. Finally, she let out a frustrated sigh. "I don't know what happened. I feel like I'm failing again." I put a hand on her shoulder. "This isn't about failure. This is about problem-solving, patience, and learning to handle setbacks without panic. Money can be replaced. Trust and integrity cannot. Let's stay calm and think it through." After a thorough search, we discovered the money had slipped behind the drawer of her desk, a simple accident. Relief washed over her face, and she laughed nervously. "I feel ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. "Not at all," I said, smiling. "This is exactly the kind of challenge that teaches resilience. You stayed calm, you worked through it, and you solved the problem. That's growth." Later that week, she approached me with a small project idea. "Mom, I want to start a budget journal," she explained. "I want to track my earnings, savings, and spending. I think it'll help me be more responsible, and it'll show that I'm serious about being honest and accountable." I felt a rush of pride. "That's an excellent idea," I said. "It's practical, it's proactive, and it will teach you lifelong skills. I'll help you set it up if you want." She smiled, a genuine, confident smile this time. "I'd like that, Mom. I want to do it right." As we worked on her budget journal together, I marveled at the transformation unfolding before my eyes. The girl who had once hidden money from me out of fear and resentment was now taking deliberate steps to cultivate honesty, responsibility, and foresight. She was learning not only to make amends, but also to prevent future mistakes through mindfulness and accountability. And yet, even as progress bloomed, I knew the lessons of the past could never be forgotten. Trust once broken requires constant care, and while she was making remarkable strides, there would be moments of doubt, challenges, and potential slip-ups along the way. My role as a mother had shifted, from disciplinarian to guide, from enforcer to partner in her growth. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with clear, earnest eyes. "Mom, I feel like I'm finally starting to understand what it means to be responsible, to be honest, and to be someone you can trust. Thank you for not giving up on me." I held her hand, feeling tears prick at my own eyes. "You've done the hard work yourself," I said softly. "I didn't give up because I knew you were capable. And now, you're showing me every day just how strong and resilient you really are." She snuggled under the covers, a quiet peace settling over her. I watched her for a moment, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and cautious hope. The journey wasn't over, but the path forward was clear. In that quiet moment, I realized something profound. Mistakes don't define a person. Actions after mistakes do. And watching her navigate the consequences of her choices, embrace responsibility, and actively work to become a better version of herself was one of the most powerful lessons I could ever witness. The house felt calmer, warmer, and alive with the promise of healing. And while the memory of her secret bank account, the betrayal, the anger, the hurt, would never completely fade, it had sparked growth, understanding, and a stronger bond than we had ever had before. The following weeks felt almost like a new beginning. There was still tension at times, small disagreements over chores, occasional forgotten tasks, minor arguments, but the underlying trust had shifted. She had begun to take initiative in ways that surprised me, little acts of responsibility that weren't prompted or demanded. She was growing, and I could see the pride she felt in herself reflected in the way she carried herself. One Saturday morning, I noticed her in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, flipping through her budget journal. She was carefully tallying her savings, annotating her entries with little notes about lessons learned and goals for the future. I paused at the doorway, watching her focused expression, the gentle hum of concentration in the room. "You've been working on that for a while now," I said softly. Stepping closer, she looked up, eyes bright. "Yes, Mom. I think keeping track like this helps me see exactly where I'm at. I want to be responsible, not just with money, but with everything. I want to show that I can be trusted." I smiled, kneeling beside her. "And you are showing that. This isn't just about numbers. It's about character, about being accountable for your choices." Her gaze dropped back to the journal. I also realized it's not about how much I save or spend. It's about being honest, even when it's hard, about making things right when I make mistakes, and about learning from them so I don't repeat them. Her words struck me deeply. She had internalized the lessons of the past months, not out of fear or obligation, but from a genuine desire to grow. I felt a mixture of pride and relief, knowing that she was taking responsibility in a way that would last far beyond the immediate crisis. Later that afternoon, I suggested we have a small family meeting to discuss goals and responsibilities. My husband and younger child joined us at the kitchen table, curious about what I had planned. She took the lead, presenting her budget journal, explaining her plans, and outlining the steps she was taking to rebuild trust and stay accountable. Her confidence surprised me. She spoke clearly, openly, and respectfully, and I could see that her efforts had already begun to earn the trust of our family members. My husband nodded approvingly, and even my younger child listened attentively, impressed by the maturity in her words. Afterward, I pulled her aside. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. "The way you've handled this, it's beyond what I could have hoped for." She smiled, a mixture of relief and humility in her expression. "Thanks, Mom. I want to make things right. I don't ever want to feel like I did before, hiding and lying." The next challenge came unexpectedly. A distant relative, someone who had heard whispers about her actions, reached out with a pointed question. It wasn't accusatory, but it carried a weight of curiosity and judgment. I watched as my daughter considered her response carefully, taking a deep breath before speaking honestly. "Yes," she said quietly. "I made mistakes. I took money I shouldn't have and I hid it. I've returned it, and I'm working to earn back trust. I've learned a lot about honesty and responsibility, and I hope to show that going forward." Her calm, reflective response surprised me, not just because she faced the situation head-on, but because she did so without defensiveness, without anger, without shame that would have blocked her growth. It was a pivotal moment, a public affirmation of accountability, a test she passed with grace. That evening, I reflected on the journey we had taken. The betrayal had been severe, and the emotional pain had cut deep, but it had sparked change. She had grown, not just in practical responsibility, but in emotional maturity, empathy, and self-awareness. Our bond had shifted from fragile trust to a deliberate, conscious effort to honor and respect each other. We began instituting small daily rituals, a morning check-in, an evening reflection, and weekend activities where we collaborated on tasks together. These rituals weren't just about maintaining order. They were about reinforcing connection, accountability, and mutual respect. One day, as we worked together in the garden, she paused to pull a weed and looked at me. "Mom, I think I finally understand why trust is so important, not just with money but with everything. Because once it's broken, it changes everything." I nodded, feeling the weight of her insight. "Exactly. And rebuilding it takes patience, effort, and honesty. And you're doing that every day." Her face softened and she smiled. "I want to keep doing that, even when it's hard." The transformation wasn't instant. There were still moments of tension, moments where she tested boundaries, moments where I questioned if the trust would hold. But each time she chose honesty, accountability, and reflection. Each time, I saw her learning, growing, and internalizing the lessons in a way that was authentic and lasting. One quiet evening, as we sat together, watching the sun set over the backyard, she turned to me. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. I know I hurt you, but you stayed patient. You taught me how to fix things, not just scold me." I reached for her hand, feeling the warmth of connection that had been rebuilt over weeks of effort, tears, and reflection. "I didn't give up because I knew you were capable of growth. And now, you're showing me every day how strong and responsible you can be." She leaned her head on my shoulder, a gesture of trust and closeness that felt like a quiet victory. For the first time, I felt that we had reached a point where healing wasn't just possible. It was happening, moment by moment, choice by choice. And yet, I knew the journey wasn't over. Life would continue to test her. Temptations, mistakes, and challenges would arise. But now she had the tools, the mindset, and the emotional resilience to navigate them with integrity. In that moment, I realized something essential. The betrayal had not only been a test of her character, but of mine as a parent. I had learned patience, empathy, and the importance of guidance without control. And she had learned that mistakes, while painful, could be transformed into lessons, opportunities, and growth. The house was quiet now, filled with a sense of calm and cautious optimism. The emotional weight of the past months had begun to lift, replaced by hope, understanding, and a bond strengthened through adversity. I glanced at her, sleeping peacefully in her room later that night, and whispered softly, "We made it this far, and we'll keep moving forward together." The following days felt almost surreal. The storm of emotions, the tension, the fear, and the anger had softened into a rhythm I hadn't imagined could exist so soon after betrayal. Our home no longer carried the weight of whispered accusations or stolen money. It carried something stronger now: understanding, accountability, and an unspoken promise of growth. One afternoon, I found her in the backyard, sitting beneath the old oak tree, notebook open on her lap. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows over her focused face. She looked up and smiled when she saw me approaching. "Mom," she said, voice calm, almost reverent. I wrote something about everything that happened and about everything I want to be moving forward. I sat beside her, feeling a lump form in my throat. Can I read it? I asked gently. She nodded, handing me the pages. I read through words that were honest, raw, and filled with reflection. She wrote about the shame she had felt, the lessons learned, and her determination to be a trustworthy, compassionate, and responsible person. But what struck me most was the gratitude woven through every line. The gratitude for the chance to rebuild, for guidance, for patience, and for love that never abandoned her. When I looked up, she met my gaze, eyes bright with sincerity. I know I can't undo the past, Mom, but I want to prove every day that I'm not the same person who made that mistake. I want to earn respect, trust, and love, not just from you, but from myself. I felt tears well up, but they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of pride, relief, and hope. I reached out and hugged her tightly. You've done more than you realize. The way you're choosing honesty, accountability, and growth, it's a rare thing, and it fills me with hope. You've truly changed, and I'm so proud of you. That evening, we gathered as a family for a quiet dinner, the atmosphere noticeably lighter. My husband smiled at her warmly, and my younger child hugged her tightly. For the first time in months, there was no tension, no cautious distance. There was just connection, a family knit closer together because of adversity, not in spite of it. After dinner, we sat in the living room, reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. I asked her gently, "What's the biggest lesson you've learned from this experience?" She thought for a moment. That honesty is everything, that mistakes are inevitable, but what matters is how you face them, and that love, real love, doesn't abandon you, even when you're at your worst. It teaches you, it guides you, and it helps you grow. I nodded, heart full. Exactly, and that's a lesson you'll carry with you for the rest of your life. In the weeks that followed, our home settled into a new normal. There were still small reminders of the past, the memory of the hidden account, the hurt it caused, but they no longer carried the power to disrupt our peace. Each day was a chance to reinforce trust, to nurture connection, and to continue the journey of growth together. One Saturday morning, as she prepared breakfast, I noticed the quiet confidence in her movements, the attentiveness in her actions, the thoughtfulness in her gestures. She had grown, not just in maturity, but in emotional intelligence, responsibility, and self-awareness. And I realized that the lessons learned from betrayal had transformed her into someone far stronger and wiser than before. That evening, as I tucked her into bed, she hugged me tightly. "Mom, thank you for everything, for not giving up, for believing I could change, for teaching me how to face myself." I held her close, my heart swelling with love. "I didn't do it alone. You've done the hard work yourself. You've faced your mistakes, learned from them, and chosen to grow. That's what makes you remarkable." She smiled softly, eyes shining. "I want to keep growing, Mom, and I want to make sure I never let you down again." "You won't," I whispered. "Because you've learned the value of integrity, and you've shown the courage to rebuild trust. That's worth more than anything else." Later that night, I sat alone in the quiet house, reflecting on the journey from betrayal to reconciliation. The pain had been deep, the lessons hard-earned, but the growth was undeniable. I realized that parenting isn't just about protecting or instructing. It's about guiding, loving and believing in the potential for change, even when the mistakes feel irreparable. As I looked toward the future, I felt a quiet confidence that our bond had not only survived, but had grown stronger because of adversity. The lessons she had learned would shape her for a lifetime, and the trust we had rebuilt was now fortified by honesty, effort, and mutual respect, and in that moment, I felt a sense of pride unlike anything I had ever experienced, a pride not born from perfection, but from resilience, courage, and the triumph of love over betrayal. Because sometimes, the hardest moments bring the deepest transformations, and sometimes, The love that endures through mistakes is the love that teaches us who we truly are. I whispered softly into the stillness of the night. We made it through. And together, we'll face whatever comes next, stronger, wiser, and united. And as the moonlight filtered through her window, I knew this wasn't just a story of money lost or trust broken. It was a story of redemption, growth, and the extraordinary strength of family. Would you have found the courage to forgive, guide, and rebuild trust if it were your child? Could love really transform betrayal into growth? If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your insights could help someone else navigating the same journey. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that inspire, challenge, and show the true power of resilience.